Hi darlings, Mimi G here with another sew along as part of my Mimi G for Simplicity pattern collection. Today we're going to be working on pattern 1116, which are these amazing swimsuits, and I'm super excited about these, so let's get started. Now if you're new to sewing or you just need a little refresher, I suggest you watch the basics video linked in the description box below. I talk about all the basic tools you're going to need, how to pick your size, how to cut your fabric, your pattern, how to read grain lines and understand what the pattern pieces are telling you to do. After you've done that, come back and watch this video. Now aside from those basic tools I talked about, you're going to need a couple more things for this particular project. You're going to need stretch needles. Now there is a difference between jersey ballpoint needles and stretch needles. Stretch needles are made for very elastic, spandexy sort of fabrics. It will make your sewing so much easier, so make sure that you get the right needles. You're also going to need a 1/4 inch wide elastic. Now I prefer to use a 1/4 inch wide cotton swimwear elastic. I think it's softer and it feels better inside of my swimsuits. And of course you're going to need pattern 1116. Now we're going to be sewing view A and B. Now the only difference between view A and view B is that you can have the overlay in a different fabric and your swimsuit in a different fabric, like I'm going to be doing here. Or you can cut all the pieces from one single fabric. Let's go over the pattern pieces you should have cut. You should have pattern piece number 1, which is the front of our swimsuit, and this needs to be cut out twice. You're going to cut it out of swimwear fabric and you're going to cut it out of lining. I just happened to cut both my pieces out of swimwear fabric because I had extra yardage, but if you want to cut your lining out of separate mesh or swimwear lining, then simply cut out one piece on the fold with your swimwear fabric and then cut the other one out of your lining. You should also cut out pattern piece number 3, which is the back of our swimsuit, and you're going to do the same thing. You're going to cut out 2 from your fabric and 2 from your lining. You're also going to cut out pattern piece number 2, and you're going to be cutting 2 pieces, which is the front overlay of our swimsuit. You're also going to be cutting out pattern piece number 4, which are your straps. And pattern piece 5, 6, and 10 are not cut out of fabric or lining, but instead are just elastic guides. So this is the length of elastic you're going to be cutting, let's say for your legs and for your straps. Make sure you transfer all of your markings, and now that we have everything cut out, we can start sewing. Go ahead and grab piece number 2, which is the front overlay of our swimsuit. We are going to sew the front of our overlay by turning under 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. We're going to be using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance most of this entire swimsuit actually, unless I specifically say something other than 3/8 of an inch. I also want to point out that you should be using either a stretch stitch if your machine has one, or I'm going to be sewing my swimsuit from start to finish using a very, very narrow zigzag stitch because it helps the stitch stretch with my fabric. So grab one of your overlays, and with the right side facing you, make sure that you turn wrong side facing you, make sure you turn over 3/8 of an inch, and we're going to be sewing about 1/8 of an inch away from the folded edge. We're going to do this for both front overlays. You'll have a very narrow stitch, and if you have a serger, you could sew this entire thing on a serger, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim off the excess. So you could serge this, turn over the 3/8 of an inch, and then make your stitching 1/8 of an inch away from the folded edge if you want to do it that way as well. Now I have my one of my front overlays, and now we're going to do the same thing to the other side. Now I want you, just so that you don't get confused, to have one wrong side laid over the right side so that you know which one is your right and which one is your left, and you don't end up sewing your hem incorrectly on one of the sides. Turn under your 3/8 of an inch, and then again sew 1/8 of an inch away from that folded edge. Okay, I have sewn the other edge of my front, and I went ahead and trimmed away the excess seam allowance. And now we're going to lay one overlay on top of the other. So one wrong side should be on top of one right side. And I want you to go ahead and pin at the bottom. And then pin along the side. I'm just going to keep this all together. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to sew across the bottom. And we're going to baste the bottom of these together. You can just use a long stitch if you want, or just your zigzag stitch is fine. Make sure your notches are aligned. Okay, so since this is going to be on the outside of our swimsuit, we of course want to hide all of this seam allowance. So what we're going to do is you're going to take one and you're going to fold it over so that the seam allowance is on the inside, and then you're going to repin your sides. And now we have a clean finish at the bottom. And now you have a front finished overlay. Alrighty, now that we have pressed the seam and you have turned your overlay over so that the seam allowance is encased between the two layers, and you have pinned your sides, we're going to gather the sides. So you should have marked either 2 dots that were on your pattern piece or had made little slits to mark those dots, and that's where we're going to gather from one dot to the other dot. So I want you to put your machine back on a straight stitch, and I want you to use the longest stitch available to you. So mine goes up to a 5 or 6. So go ahead and put your needle in 3/8 of an inch away from the edge of your fabric. And we are not going to be back stitching at the end of this. We're only going to back stitch at the beginning. And pull. And then placing your needle 1/4 of an inch away from the first stitching line, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to back stitch, and then you're going to sew and pull your threads. And you're going to do the same thing to the other side. So we're going to start at the top this time. And we're going to back stitch at the bottom. And then again. Okay, go ahead and grab pattern piece number 1, which is the front of our swimsuit. We're working on our swimwear fabric, not our linings. And we're going to place our overlay on top of our swimsuit. So what you're going to do is on your swimsuit, on the side, you should have had 2 dots that you transferred over. I made little slits. And so you're going to place the bottom of your overlay at that notch. And I want you to pin. And what we're going to do is we're going to gather the overlay until it fits and matches this other notch that we have here. So what you're going to do is you're going to pull the top threads only. Pull and gather, pull and gather, pull and gather until your notches align, and then pin. Adjust your gathers. And you're going to do the same thing on the other side. So pin the bottom of your overlay first at that notch. And then pull. Until your notches align, and then pin. And now we of course want to secure this, so go back to your normal length stitch and back to your very, very narrow zigzag stitch. And we're going to sew from the bottom all the way up, just to secure this in place. And we're sewing through all layers using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Backstitch at the beginning, and we're going to backstitch when we get to the end. Now you're going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to start at the top now. And go ahead and cut off any loose threads. Okay, now that we have secured our sides and we have our overlay sewn onto our swimsuit, we're going to also secure the arm's eye, just so that it stays in place. So working with your layers aligned, go ahead and pin to keep them together. And we're just going to sew these so that they become one. And do the same thing to the other side. Okay, I want you to grab pattern piece number 3, which is the back of our swimsuit, and we're going to sew together our center back seam. So with right sides facing, go ahead and pin. You should have 3 notches in the back. And then pin at the bottom, and then a couple more times along the middle. And we're using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Go ahead and press your seam open. All the way down the back. And then we're going to place these right sides facing, matching our notches. So pin along the entire side seam, front to back. And we're going to sew using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way down. You're going to pin and sew the entire side seam on the other side the same exact way. Now that we have both of our side seams sewn together, we can set this aside for just a sec. And go ahead and grab your straps, which is pattern piece number 4. And with right sides facing, we're going to stitch using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you're going to sew both straps the same way. Okay, once you have your straps done, you can either use a loop turner or I'm just going to use a safety pin. And I'm going to place it inside, and then I'm just going to sift it through. And then I'll just pull it all the way through. And grab your 3/8 of an inch wide elastic and cut it the length of your strap. You're going to cut 2 of these. So using the same pattern piece number 4, you're going to cut out 2 pieces. Now I'm going to put my safety pin in my elastic, and I'm going to sift my elastic through my casing. This will make for a much more comfortable strap. Now before we pull too much, I'm going to have you remove your safety pin, and I want you to stitch this down. Just do a couple of back stitches. Now you can go ahead and adjust your strap. Make sure you don't lose that other piece of elastic inside, so try to hold on to it. And then stitch down the other end. You're going to finish the other strap the same way. Alrighty, you're going to turn your swimsuit right side out, and we're going to stitch down our straps. I want you to place your strap right in the center of your shoulder seam. And using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, I want you to stitch it down. You can pin it if you'd like to help you keep it all together. Some swimsuit fabric is kind of slippery, so. And then do the same thing on the other side. And we're going to set this aside and grab the front and back lining pieces. I want you to sew the center back of your back piece the same way we did before, with right sides facing, and then you're going to open it and you're going to stitch it right sides together to the front of the swimsuit, just the way we did for the swimwear fabric. Okay, now that you've sewn together your lining and you did the center back seam and then sewed your side seams front to back, we're going to set the lining out for a second, and we're going to attach the strap to the back of our swimsuit. So we're going to do this in a crisscross motion. So you're going to go your right strap to the left side of your swimsuit, and you're going to pin. And then you're going to take your left strap and you're going to pin it. You should have dots there or notches depending on which you transferred. Okay, and then just to make sure that it's right, take a look at it. Make sure it looks right. And once it's done, you're going to go ahead and stitch down your back straps. Now that we've done that, we can go ahead and slip our lining over the top of our swimsuit. So keeping your lining wrong side out, I want you to go ahead and slip your swimsuit on the inside. Go ahead and pin first at the center back seam, so make sure that both center back seams are matching. And then you want to make sure that your straps are to the inside, and then pin. Pin at your side seams. Pin at the other side seam. And then on the front, we're going to pin. Across the top. At the arm's eye. And then you want to make sure, two things, that you're keeping your strap on the inside and free from any stitching, and that you move your overlay to the inside a little bit, kind of push it out of the way, so that you can make sure that when you're pinning swimsuit to swimsuit to lining at the front, that you're not catching that overlay. Pin at the center front. And do the same thing on the other side. Now that we have the entire thing pinned, we're going to sew lining to swimsuit all the way around using a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. I'm going to start at one side seam. I'm going to pivot across the top of my shoulder. I'm going to pivot down the front. When I get to the center V of my front, I'm going to pivot and go up the other side. Once you've sewn all the way around, right at the V, at the front of our swimsuit, I want you to take your scissors and I want you to snip. Be careful not to snip through your stitching. You just want to snip close to your stitching. Okay, we're going to trim some of this seam allowance, so you're just going to cut off a little bit, especially around the front area and any curves. Now we can turn this right side out, and then you're just going to push your lining on the inside of your swimsuit. Okay, I'm going to turn this out so that I'm looking at my lining only. The right side of my swimsuit with the overlay is on the inside, and we're going to understitch. What that means is we're going to be stitching only through your lining layer, not all layers. So what you want to do is, starting in the back, let's start at the center back. I want you to pull through, right, your hand so it's open here. This is your lining and this is your swimsuit over here. And what we're going to do is we're going to be making sure that our seam allowance is facing our lining. And then we're going to be sewing really close to that seam, probably about 1/8 of an inch away from it. And we're going to do this, remember, we're only sewing on our lining side, not our swimsuit. And we're going to be sewing all the way around as far as we can go. As you sew around, make sure that you can feel on the fabric that your seam allowance, because you can feel the bump, is still facing down towards your lining. Okay, looks like that's as far as I can go here. To go again from one side seam now to that center back. And now I'm going to understitch the front. I'm going to start at my V and work my way up one side and then do the other side. Sewing again only on my lining fabric. Now, as you can see, the understitching helps keep that lining rolled to the inside so it doesn't roll out when you're wearing it. Alright, I have gone ahead and pressed the entire top of my swimsuit using a cool iron, and I would suggest using pressing cloth. You don't want to put direct heat onto any spandex that could melt. So. And then now what we're going to do is we're going to create the casing for the elastic along the back of our swimsuit. So starting at one side seam, I want you to place your needle so that it's 3/8 of an inch away from the folded edge of your swimsuit. And we're going to sew across the entire back. You're going to stop when you reach the other side seam. Okay, we're going to cut our elastic for the back, so grab your paper pattern number 5, which is your elastic guide for the upper back. And you're just going to measure out some elastic using a 1/4 inch wide elastic. And you're going to cut one. ahead and put your safety pin in through the end of one side of your elastic. And what you're going to do is you're going to reach inside in between your layers. And you're going to put your elastic inside of that casing that we just created. And you're going to sift it until we get to the other side. Now we want to make sure to keep an eye on this because you don't want the other side of your elastic to go all the way inside. I'm going to sift about halfway, and then I'm going to check on the other end of my elastic. Now before pulling, I'm reaching the other end of my side seam, so I put my hand in between the layers. And I'm going to pull just a little bit. I'm going to remove my safety pin. And I'm going to stitch this down right where my side seam is. That's where I'm going to stitch down, stitching through all layers to make sure I catch that elastic. Now put my hand into the other side. I can see that I still have my elastic there, so I'm going to go ahead and pull and then stitch it down. Go ahead and pull on the back. And clean up by finishing off any loose threads. Just snip everything off. Make sure you have a nice clean finish, and then we'll continue. Okay, now we're going to close out our crotch. So I want you to get the crotch of your swimsuit front and back. Just leave your lining hanging there. And I want you to bring your front to back crotch together. And you're going to pin it and stitch using 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And you're going to do the same thing with your lining crotch. Bring those two together, pin and sew. And now you can just put your swimsuit back over. And as you can see, we've now stitched our crotch on both sides, front and back, and our lining. And now we're going to stitch this together so that it becomes one, our lining and our swimsuit. Alright, we're going to start by aligning our crotch seams, and we're going to pin there first. And we're just going to baste around this entire leg opening so that, like I said, we can join both lining and swimwear together. Pin at the side seam, making sure that your side seams are aligned. And make sure that your notches are aligned along the leg opening. And you're going to sew all the way around. I'm sewing about a 1/4 inch away from the edge of my fabric. Now you're going to sew the other opening the same way. Okay, now that our lining and our swimwear fabric have been joined at the leg, now go ahead and cut out 2 pieces of elastic using your elastic guide, which is pattern piece number 6. And so I've already cut out both of my elastics, and I'm going to go ahead and overlap them. So I want you to overlap your elastic about 3/8 of an inch, and we're going to zigzag it just so that it stays put. And you're going to do the same thing to the other one. And now what we're going to do is we're going to place our elastic over the top of our swimsuit, like this. We're working on the right side of our swimsuit, not our lining. And I'm going to pin right where I'm going to be starting. Then I'm going to pin again at my side seam. I'm stretching to make sure that my elastic and my leg opening are even. And I'm going to pin. And now using a wider zigzag stitch, I'm going to stitch this down. And my elastic is right along the edge of my fabric. And you're going to be pulling just a tad. Now what we're going to do is, because we're looking at the right side of our swimsuit, we're going to turn this to the inside, and then we're going to turn it again, completely encasing that elastic. And we're going to sew close to the edge. You're going to be using a very narrow zigzag stitch. Go slow when you get to the bumpy parts, because you have elastic and you have seam allowances and you don't want to break a needle, so just go slow. And now the entire leg casing is finished. Your elastic is inside, so you don't even see it, and it's nice and comfortable. And you're going to finish the other leg opening the same way. That's all there is to it. I hope you've enjoyed this sew along. Until next time, peace.